Another day, another attempt at gaslighting people into thinking that some AAA game from some studio is some major steal. Like, I can't believe they're selling Oblivion for $50. So many people like came out and tried to make this out to be some spectacular thing. Like Bethesda is based, they shadow dropped this day one, they completely redid the models. Everybody came out and tried acting as if this was some big phenomenal thing. And this went through the typical pattern that we always see whenever this happens, is that people start hyping this thing up, and then the reality sets in, is that, wait, type A, type B, gameplay changes, the fact that a lot of these people never played the original to begin with. The Oblivion thing is a complete and total farce. And I do think people really need a wake-up call. The Elder Scrolls is not relevant. It never was. It never will be. It's not competitive with like the superior Nintendo RPG franchises. Like I saw someone try and argue that like the Elder Scrolls is the most popular single player RPG of all time. Completely failing to account for the fact Pokemon is a single player RPG. Oh, but it has multiplayer features though. Yeah, after you play through the single player portion. It's such a gigantic cope. You know, every single time this happens. When Starfield came out, everybody was saying that game was going to be Game of the Year. And look at where it is now. Bethesda is a complete failure of a studio with absolutely nothing going for them other than some perceived nostalgia from older people who were blown away by the fact that you could walk anywhere in Skyrim. Like that's basically what it all comes down to. Because they don't care about the stories in these games, the mechanics, the gameplay, the features, like because all of that is like severely outclassed by Nintendo RPGs. Not even like the big major ones. In a lot of ways, B-list series like Xenoblade vastly outperform Bethesda now. So this idea that Bethesda is some like spectacular, like top of the line, top tier developer because they put your character in an open field really needs to die. Okay, it's a relic of the PS360 era. It's I would say the absolute epitome of like anti Nintendo discourse from that period. This idea that games like Legend of Zelda are stale and limited because Link has to actually traverse an area with actual level design. You know, it's it's embarrassing. And it always was. I've always maintained that like Twilight Princess was better than Oblivion, Skyward Sword was better than Skyrim, and obviously like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are better than Fallout 4 and Starfield, right? Only a complete idiot would dispute this, but uh, we still have to go through this period every single time one of these mediocre Western slops get re-released is go through this like brief period of people with no real experience with the games who don't know anything about RPGs coming out and trying to say this is like some big spectacular thing. This happens like every single time Bethesda puts one of these out, and it really needs to stop. Like Oblivion was not impressive when it came out. It's not impressive now, and there's nothing particularly interesting about this remaster. The thing that really gets me, that I do think needs to be brought up, is the price point. People are trying to are trying to tell you that like, oh, $50, that's way more affordable than like Nintendo Switch 2 remasters. Completely ignoring the fact that if you already own the game, you can pay an upgrade fee of $10 and get your improved version of the game at a much lower price point. So if you bought Breath of the Wild when it came out and upgraded, it'll cost less than the Oblivion remaster. And that's kind of like the cope that people have right now, is that they're trying to say that, like, well, I never played Breath of the Wild. I never bought the DLC, and that just kind of exposes them as people who never really had any interest in buying or playing the game to begin with. And I do think that really needs to be like talked about more when it comes to these remasters and re-releases. Like, I don't. People need to stop acting as if these are some big major deals. Like, I'm certainly not sitting here arguing that like Breath of the Wild should be considered like game of the year for 2025 because it's getting like an updated like re-release on Nintendo Switch 2, right? Like, I have like actual new releases that I want to like, talk about for that year, right? But I have seen like people unironically pushing that for Oblivion. And I think that really just goes to show you just how out of touch and delusional the Elder Scrolls fan base actually is. Like, there is just no disputing the fact that the Elder Scrolls is a dead IP. It's only relevant because of some perceived notion that this is some prestigious brand that leans hard into Tolkien era fantasy, that it's like some like in-depth, elaborate RPG experience, and it's just not. In a lot of ways, it never was. Like, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the modern equivalent of Ultima, actually, in which people like look at this like generic fantasy aesthetic, and then try and like pass it off as being like more mature and sophisticated than like what the better developers are doing on Nintendo hardware, right? Um, Ultima back in the day was hyped among its like niche audience for being like having like mature story elements and like, oh man, some guy dies at the beginning of the game. Like, having like for things like that. Nothing about the actual gameplay or the actual experience because like, the Nintendo games were better than that. It's Elder Scrolls is like the same kind of thing. People don't like Elder Scrolls or Bethesda games as a whole. They like the idea of them. And I think this like kind of encompasses um the entire appeal of like the PlayStation, Xbox, PC kind of like mindset in general, because these people don't play games. And this becomes more and more evident the more you see people rant and rave about mediocre releases like this.